Okay, our next talk is Fern Lulham. This is the talk that was delayed from this morning. So over to you, Fern. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I was waiting for that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by asking you a question. How many of you sitting in this room have ever faced a challenge? Put your hands up. Well, I can't see you, but I'm going to assume that is... Oh, yeah, that's the challenge, yeah. I'm going to assume that most of you, if not all of you, did put your hands up for that, so you can put them down now. We all face challenges in our lives at some point or another, and challenges come along with fear, anxiety, and an unknown outcome. And so for many people, the idea of being visually impaired or being blind is their ultimate challenge. It epitomizes the idea of challenge for people, because when you can't see, you're in a world of the unknown. You're in a world of fear. And so when parents have newborn babies who are diagnosed with a visual impairment, it's a very scary time, because all of a sudden they don't realize what is going to happen. They don't know what their child's future is going to look like. And sometimes they feel that their hopes and dreams for that child's future may be compromised by this visual impairment. And if you're a parent of a child who has been diagnosed with aniridia or any other visual impairment, you'll know that fear. And it was the same for my parents when I was diagnosed at 6 weeks old with aniridia and nystagmus. And the doctor that my parents spoke to at 6 weeks old as a newborn baby told my parents that I would never see anything in my life. So you can imagine how scared they must have felt. And you can imagine the challenge that must have posed for my parents at that time. To have this little girl who now apparently would never be able to see anything. Luckily enough for me, that doctor was clearly ignorant of my particular condition, because although I am very severely visually impaired, very short-sighted, I do have some useful vision. And I would hope that in this day and age, with the amazing doctors that we've been seeing today, nobody would be misguided with that kind of wrong advice. However, I do encourage parents, families, and even people with visual impairments themselves to seek the best advice from doctors. And if you are in any doubt, get a second opinion, because it's so important to know where you're starting from. And at that point, my parents had a challenge. They had a decision to make. They could either raise me with that fear and that anxiety and the unknown, for me to grow up feeling like maybe I wouldn't be able to achieve things, maybe I couldn't do things, maybe I did need to be protected and mollycoddled. Or else they could raise me with hope. And hope is something that I've heard through many people's speeches today already. The words success, hope, encouragement. And that's something that I want to stress through my talk, this idea of hope and hopefulness, because it's something that we all need. When we're talking about psychology and we're talking about depression, depression most commonly happens through an absence of hope. And I was raised with hope. I went to mainstream primary and secondary school, and my parents had the same expectations of me as my fully sighted brother and all of my fully sighted friends. Not doing well as a visually impaired little girl, but doing well as another human being who needs to reach the same potential as all of the people around her, having the same responsibilities, the same expectations, and wanting to achieve just as much. And this was what I believe made me achieve so well in school, get good grades in my exams, pass my GCSEs and my A-levels, and have the confidence to go to university in Cardiff, leaving my home in Hastings, and setting out on this new independent journey. I stayed in Cardiff for a year, and my parents' journey with challenges was yet to begin, because I called them up one afternoon from Cardiff, And I said, I've heard about an international exchange opportunity for a university in North Carolina. So I would be going to study there. So you can imagine if there are any parents here or if there are any relatives and friends of people who have visual impairment, if your friend, your relative, your little boy or little girl called you up and said, I want to go and study halfway around the world, how easy would it be to let the fear overcome you and to say no? Because you want to keep them safe. You want to protect them. Your love dictates that fear, that anxiety, that unknown, the complete unknown, where I'm going out to America all of a sudden. My parents could have said no, but I am so pleased that they said yes. And luckily for me, that is what gave me the confidence to go there. I said to them, I will always wonder if I don't go. And 3 years later, I stayed there and I graduated with a degree in communication from Western Carolina University. And I couldn't be happier. It was an amazing experience, and it proved to me that I could achieve just as much as anybody else and that I would never be held back because of my visual impairment. When I returned home to the UK, the other conditions that are often associated with the aniridia started developing in my eyes. So I started getting cataracts, glaucoma, and corneal problems. And it was at that point that I started to get in much more frequent contact with the medical profession. When my eyesight started to deteriorate, I realised how some doctors can give you information and it can fill you with so much hope, and how other doctors can give you exactly the same information and it leave you feeling in utter despair about your life, about your future. I have experienced both sides of the spectrum. I have had a doctor ask me how important my sight is to me, which I don't know about you, but pretty important was the answer to that question. She said, you kind of just have to accept that your eyesight is going to deteriorate, and I just want to make it as comfortable as possible for you. So not much hope. It was kind of like give up, but we'll try and make it as good as possible. And then I went to the Queen Victoria Hospital, where I am now, with my consultant, Mr. Hamada. And he is one of the most positive and hopeful people that I have ever met. And he has made me realise, to any doctors sitting in this room, that words, when coming from doctors, are so powerful and have such authority. Because those of you with visual impairments, those of you who have ever been to a doctor in your life will realise that when you go home from that appointment, the appointment doesn't end there. You replay the conversation you've had with that doctor over and over and over in your mind. You pick it apart, you analyse it. What did they mean by that? What does that mean for my future? What implications does that have for my quality of life? And so it is so important to pick the words carefully. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we should sugarcoat the facts, that we should try and dress things up to make them look better than they are. But like I say, Mr. Hamada has talked to me about exactly the same information, but put so much more hope in there. I've had several operations with him, not all of which have gone well, some of which I've had to have redone. But he is always talking to me, even from the moment I enter his room, with an attitude of, you are a human being. For example, he'll ask me about my work and how I'm doing and how I'm getting on with my life, before he even starts to examine me. And I know how busy doctors are. He always has a packed waiting room of people. But he always takes that time, and I would wait forever to see him for those little details that may seem insignificant, but make all the difference because they make me feel valued. They make me feel like he believes in me as a person and wants to know about my life. And there is always a spin of, today might not be an amazing day, but tomorrow could be with him. And it's what makes me feel better about myself. And so, like I say, to all doctors, I implore you, you don't have to get all emotionally involved with everyone's situation, but just please give as much hope as you possibly can with whatever news you're giving, because the bad news is the one where you're presented with a challenge. How am I going to make this awful news sound in any way hopeful and not instill a huge amount of fear in my patient? But I'm telling you, if you think about the words that you choose, there is a way to do it, because I've seen it myself, I've experienced it. And then alongside my treatment, I was still a young 20-something woman who wanted to be independent, who wanted to carry on living this life that I had led so far. Going to America, I didn't want to lose that spirit, the amazing attitude that I'd been brought up with to be just like everyone else. So I wanted to get a job. I wanted to pay my way. I wanted to live independently, get a flat of my own. And I eventually, after a long time of searching, it's hard to get a job whether you're visually impaired or not, but after about a year, I found one. And it was then that I realised that it's not just the getting into work that is the challenge there. It's also what comes afterwards. And for me, it was the emotional side. I was lucky enough to myself have an access to work assessment where I was given various equipment. And of course, for employers, it's a challenge to know how quite to deal with visually impaired employees or disabled employees in any capacity. It's one where they're not sure how much to expect of you. They don't want to put too much of a burden on you, but also they want to help you achieve as much as possible. And the thing that I always talk about when I speak to people publicly is the fact that we all can identify with the emotions behind people's struggles. So we all know what it's like when we're looked over for a job, when someone gets a promotion over us, or when someone assumes what we can and can't do without asking us first. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, and it certainly doesn't take a visual impairment to know how that feels. And so all it takes from an employer to overcome that challenge is to talk to their employees, to treat them just like everyone else in their workforce who wants the same things. Because visually impaired or not, we all have the same emotional needs. We all want to succeed. We all want equal opportunities. And we don't want to be held back by assumption. It's much more productive, both for the employee and the employer, to get as much out of their staff by giving them the chance to try. Even if it's down the line, it's something that they find too hard, give them the opportunity to say that themselves rather than just assuming and holding them back. It's exactly the same principle as I was speaking about in childhood. Often we are more disabled by other people's attitudes to our disability than our physical symptoms by themselves. So for me now, here I am, and I am currently building my career in public speaking. And that is something that personally gives me hope. And so to anyone with a visual impairment, I want to say to you, find your passion. Find something that you feel that you're good at, that you enjoy doing, that makes you happy. Because on the days that I wake up and I have challenges, we all have challenges every single day of our lives. We have good days and we have bad days. But on those bad days, you need to find something that drives you, that you're enthusiastic about, that you're passionate about. And for me, making a difference and being able to talk to people in a way that they can identify with, that they can relate to in their own lives, visually impaired or not, that they can make a connection with, is that for me. It excites me. It gives me a purpose. It gives me a reason and a bright future ahead of me. My latest challenge was a month ago when I was presented with the phone call saying that I'd been matched with a guide dog, my first guide dog. And where most of, I guess a lot of the population and maybe most of you who have guide dogs would have been overjoyed and excited, and I was that. But I was also terrified. I was also very, very scared because I realised that having a dog made me much more visibly visually impaired. People would see that dog and they might judge me for it. They might think, well, she's just a blind person, she doesn't know anything. And that fear in me made me almost want to turn in the other direction. It was a challenge for me to push myself and take the plunge with Nancy. And of course, when I met Nancy, my lovely, beautiful guide dog over there, I fell in love instantly because her little face is just to die for. But I realised that I have it in my hands to change how people feel when they see a guide dog and a person walking along. Now we walk to work through the park and people stop me, and as I'm sure many guide dog owners will have here, they often ask me, "Are you training that dog?" It's the common comment that you get. And I can say, no, she's my guide dog, but I'm going to work, I'm being independent, I'm living a full life. And in that way, I have it in my hands to change people's perceptions. And that gives me hope because I don't have to settle for that image, that stereotype, that stigma that I was so afraid of. So we all need hope, visually impaired or not. Whether you're a parent, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an employer, whether you're just somebody visually impaired or not, we all need hope, and we can all give that to each other. If we just think about the words that we're using and the way that we treat people, it can make all the difference in our lives. It can provide confidence, belief in ourselves, and hope for our future. So I want to challenge you all now. Who is going to go forth from today and try and give people even more hope in their lives? Raise your hands. Again, I can't see you, but I'm really hoping it's all of you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I must say, 39 years ago, my wife went to a doctor, and we got exactly the same story, that James was blind and he wouldn't see a thing. That he's done all right, I think.
Interestingly, I got the same to my parents 66 years ago. Very, very same.
Any questions for Fern or thoughts on what she said?
Fantastic speaker.
Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you, Fern. I've not met Fern before, but I have been in touch with her on quite a number of occasions because she's been fabulous as a befriender to families who have contacted me. And she's always been so enthusiastic, and she says, yes, send me another one.
Definitely.
And I know that she's had a big effect on people because of her positive attitude. I also want to say, Robin, I don't know how you sat there and didn't cry. Crying on the walk you home. I didn't see it. You're manning up. You must be so proud of her.
I am.
But, and I've said this to a few parents today, the biggest gift you can give your children is independence if they have a visual impairment, and to make them go through life having a can-do attitude, because you're not always going to be there to pick up the pieces, and one day we'll be long gone. And I think we just really have to make them strong and to stand on their own 2 feet as much as we can. And I know that's hard, but I think we do have to do that. Wonderful talk. I feel quite moved, really. I think a lot of people are in the room. So thank you, Fern, and thank you, Robin. You've raised a wonderful
Any other thoughts or questions? Yep.
Fern, do you have any comments on sort of as you were growing up, relationships, and I don't mean necessarily love relationships, but just relationships in general with other people as you sort of grew from being a child to an adolescent to a young woman?
Do you want me to microphone? Oh, let's try that. Yeah, so I would say it's very interesting for me because we were talking about, people were talking about bullying earlier and how children can be very cruel. And I was sitting there with my dad and I was actually thinking, I have a very different story from that, which is that when I was at school, I had lots of friends, and I don't remember ever having any comments, like the lady was saying, about being called alien eyes. Obviously, I have nystagmus as well. But no, I never had that. But it was when I grew up, actually, that I've come into more problems, I guess, with ignorance around blindness and visual impairment. So I would say that, yes, bullying can be a problem when you're a child, but it doesn't stop there, and sometimes through the kindness of people's hearts, but sometimes not so kind. People can just make comments that just make you feel really worthless, and and it can be difficult. But I find that the more social you can be and the more positive you can be, you meet like-minded people, and it's like Lynn was saying about the befriending service. It's wonderful, and just to meet people that have a positive attitude and to talk to them and relate to them, that's really, really lovely. And I've always had a lot of friends, so I'm very lucky in that respect.
Anyone else?
I was wondering if it was hard looking after a guide dog.
Sorry, hard.
To look after a guide dog.
Yes. It's been a big change for me. I always say to people, I've become a mother now. Because I can hardly look after myself, let alone a dog. So now I have to think about sort of, I've got her treat pouch. This is the sparkly treat pouch because I got a new edition, blinged up version. And taking her lead and taking her nose collar and everything that you need. It's those things that you have to think about, and obviously making sure she's gone to the loo and giving her breakfast on time. So there's definitely things that you have to think about with a guide dog. It's easy to paint a picture and say, oh, you just get this dog and they're perfectly behaved and they just take you everywhere and it's amazing. And it is amazing. I would not give up Nancy for the world. But yes, it does definitely involve responsibility, and you have to be up for it. Is a challenge to look after a dog. So yeah, it's definitely something you have to think about carefully.
Anyone else? No? Excellent. I presume you, sorry if I missed it, I presume you sort of plugged your podcasts and things like that?
Yes, I do have a radio show that I present fortnightly in Canada. For those of you who have paper to write it down, it is AMI, which is Accessible Media Incorporated in Canada, and their website is ami.ca if you want to tune in. And I also have a page on Facebook, which is just Fern Lulham Public Speaker, if you want to find out any more of what I do and a little bit more about me and all of that.
Thank you very much, Fern. That's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.